Welcome. Welcome, everybody here. Thank you so much for joining us today for Lunch and Learn with Deep Roots Kansas City. I'm Chris Cardwell. I'm program manager with Deep Roots, and I'm excited to be here with you again for the November, can you believe it, November installment of our 2023 Lunch and Learn series. I don't know about y'all, but a lot of plans for this growing season have not quite made it to the drawing board for me, but winter gives us a chance to go into the dormant planning season, and it gives us a chance to highlight some of the great accomplishments that we were able to take care of. Before I begin our video broadcast today and introduce our speakers, I just want to make a few announcements, run through some housekeeping. Today's program is the Communi-Tree supported Regenerative Forestry at Sullivan Nature Sanctuary in Parkville, Missouri. We'd like to thank, we'd like to thank our sponsors, the Missouri Department of Conservation, and our hosts, the Parks and Recreation Department of the City of Parkville, Missouri, who shaped a very praiseworthy partnership to create strong and lasting change for the betterment of our shared natural resources. And we're also so grateful to you for your participation and continuing support of all of our programs and webinars. Without the audience here today, we'd be talking to ourselves. So thank you. Now, this webinar will be recorded, and all the resources will be made available online. You'll receive an email and a link to the video and anything that we discuss following this event. Lots of webinars archived on our website here, and this will be available to view and share in perpetuity. Stay tuned for that link. Now, don't forget, drop your comments in the chat and put your questions in the Q&A. Deep Roots staff is going to do our best to keep those in line and to make sure that all of our very poignant questions will be addressed by this remarkable panel that will be joining us today. Some incredible expertise at our disposal, so please don't hesitate to throw your questions in there. Now, these partnerships in conservation are the linchpin that unites and holds together the multiple individual and organizational efforts that protect and expand native landscapes throughout our region. And that's one of Deep Roots' core principles. We know that we are stronger together. Now, the imminent threat to critical natural areas is sometimes made uncomfortably clear in the current development model of clear-cutting woodlands, dozing away the topsoil along with all the microbiome contained within it, tacking together a housing subdivision or a commercial district or a new school, very important things, but then we carpet it with turf grass sod, and we finally line our promenades and our sidewalks with, say, 1-inch caliper tree saplings of sometimes questionable provenance and adaptability to our changing environment. Now, an intact forest habitat can never be replaced or its loss redeemed through this strategy and this process. So the protection and the improvement of intact, mature woodlands, original or not, is a conservation strategy that needs to be kept at the very front of every community's master plans and development requirements. Now, today's program highlights an immense effort to hold up that stewardship practice by Parks and Rec staff and city leaders in Parkville, Missouri, my favorite river town in the whole metro area and my former home for over a decade. Now, Sullivan Nature Sanctuary is a bit of a hidden jewel, nestled in the expansive riverfront park systems that includes ample miles of trails and rec amenities of English Landing and Platte Landing parks, the Barkville dog parks, a top-tier Missouri Department of Conservation river access boat ramp, a weekly farmers market in season, a slew of hometown festivals, carnivals, the list just goes on and on. Now, the preservation of this intact woodland habitat, a critical home for dozens of species of birds, mammals, insects, and aquatic life, The preservation has come to the front and center of the attention of Nature Sanctuary Director Kristen Bontrager. And the all-star assemblage of partners for this effort includes MDC's community forester, Taylor Neff, and Jacob Canyon and Dan Kroll of Good Oak LLC, our regenerative ag heroes whose work we highlighted right here in a Lunch and Learn episode just a couple months ago. Now, I'll let the video speak for itself, and then we will join our panelists right back here for some vibrant Q&A immediately after the broadcast. So without further ado, we present Healthy Woodlands for Parkville.
I'm Kristen Bontrager. I am the director for the Parkville Nature Sanctuaries. So we have the big nature sanctuary you may be familiar with, Parkville Nature Sanctuary, 116 acres. This little beauty that we're at right now is called the Sullivan Nature Sanctuary. It is two sides of a trail on Rush Creek, which we did just see a very large gar in the creek, so it's very exciting stuff over here. The purpose of us being here today is to highlight the Healthy Woodlands for Parkville grant that I'm working on with the Department of Conservation. So if you look in the distance, you might be able to see our woolly friends, our sheep, who are helping me clear out the understory and get it prepared for more native plantings out here. Part of trail maintenance is making sure that it is safe for humans, and that also includes any of our soft trees, fast growing, or something like this type of tree. We have to make sure that these are out of the way of the trails and that there is no danger on the trails of fallen trees. So a big part that we're doing right now is thinning out some of the trees that are growing really close together or have damage on the trunk that are being identified as dangerous trees. So you might think, why would you remove a tree? Well, like I just said, you want to keep them off the trail, you want to keep people safe, and also maintain conservation area. This area of Sullivan is a conservation easement, so that is what we are working for right now. A large part of the reason that I wanted to write a grant for Healthy Woodlands for Parkville was due to the massive amount of invasive species that were hard to see from the trail. Being out here on the overlook over Rush Creek, I noticed this huge infestation of Japanese hops, a notoriously difficult invasive species to get rid of. On areas we have beautiful native jewelweed, which the Japanese hops have completely taken over their habitat. So that's something I'm trying to work towards, is to eradicate the invasives over here so that the natives can come back and provide an actual habitat. You'll notice that many of these natives or invasives don't actually have any flowers on them currently and are not providing any fall pollen for the critters that actually need that for staying alive over the winter. We also have winter creeper that has taken over many parts, and there's honeysuckle that's very difficult to reach. This has all been a big challenge, and is something that will have to be addressed in the spring. One method that we are going to work on eradicating the Japanese hops is to pull out kayaks and get an aquatic safe herbicide and just spot spray as we go, get what we can from the trail, do some hand removal. And part of the Healthy Woodlands for Parkville grant is that we received 75 saplings as well. So I've got a bunch of flood tolerant species that I'll be planting in place of the invasive species so we can reestablish that habitat over here on the banks, which will also help us with our erosion control and any sort of stormwater runoff, as this is an area that is used for flood control in case the Missouri River comes up and risks flooding the city of Parkville again.
Kristen, tell us about Sullivan and a little bit of the history of this space and how you began to develop the program that we're witnessing today.
The Sullivan Nature Sanctuary is 8 acres. It's divided up into more like 3 parcels, but it's 4 parcels, seeing as the creek disconnects us. So we've got on the most north side designated parkland. So we are going to add trails, benches, and signage over there to make our trails more connected and a little bit longer, so it's more of a place that people want to come visit. The area that we're standing right now is a conservation easement. So this will be held in conservation for perpetuity, which is a great thing for us. We have been planting trees for the past decade out here. This was donated several years ago, multiple decades ago. So it's been in the Parkville family for many generations. This area is beloved by quite a few, visited all the time. Volunteers will come out here and plant their own plants. And part of the draw of Sullivan Nature Sanctuary is that it is a quiet area, and it is a nature sanctuary, and it is the only part of nature sanctuaries in Parkville that you can actually bring your dog to. Many people really are disappointed when they can't bring their pup into the Parkville Nature Sanctuary, and they are thrilled when they realize that this is an area that they can actually walk and see nature and view the creek with their dog and share it with them. So if you look over here, this is our south side of the trail, and this is what our north side looked like beforehand. We have, unfortunately, quite a bit of winter creeper. You can see the smilax, also known as greenbrier, and there is poison ivy, and while it is native, we do have to manage both wildlife and humans. This is a trail for people. We've got a lot of, being in bottomland river area, we've got a lot of trees really close together. They're softwood, fast growing. So you'll see all these silver maples back here and box elders and more mulberries than you can count ever. We've got Bradford pears. We've been working on all season to get rid of them. I think this is more of a Bradford pear nursery than anything. So this area is something that takes a lot of work and kind of led me to want to reach out and work with the Department of Conservation and propose a healthy woodlands project. So earlier this year, I decided that it was time to spend more of my time and management focus here at Sullivan Nature Sanctuary. So I did what every good land manager does first. I reached out to the Department of Conservation. I contacted our community forester, Taylor Neff, and she walked out here with me, and we identified all of the potentially hazardous trees that we could cut down and all of these other spaces for opportunity. And so from there, I had the beautiful idea with a friend of mine to reach out to a good oak to get some sheep out here for grazing. They have done a remarkable job. All of this area has been cleared in less than 2 weeks. And so this is kind of like clearing what I would say, a disaster site almost. Really, they come in and they get out all the rubble, and now I can come in here and I can start rebuilding the building. You'll see all of these trees over here. These were installed due to the Platte County Prosecutor's Office reaching out for a volunteer workday. My first thought was, I don't really have anything for anyone to do. And then I come back to our Healthy Woodlands for Parkville grant that I'm working on with the Department of Conservation. I was like, oh, well, I've got 54 trees that I have 0 time to plant. So the Platte County Prosecutor's Office came out here with me, and they are also part of the reason that are helping, rebuild the disaster area. So we've got high quality native plants that will thrive out here. Trees that you don't want to see in certain areas like redbud, you do want to see out here in these river bottoms. So we've got things that'll create habitat for the next, hopefully, 100 years to come. And adding some biodiversity, not only of species, but of age. So you can see these really big, tall trees. Once all of these that are of a similar age die out, what are we going to have? Well, luckily, we are going to have these teenager trees, as I call them. And then once their time comes, then here come the baby trees. So we've got this beautiful opportunity of, age biodiversity as well to keep this area not only habitat healthy, but age healthy. And there's a plethora of species. So we've got undergrowth, we've got shady, we've got sunny, we've got riverbank species, elderberries, buttonbush, hazelnut, pecan, things to feed the animals.
This is an example of restoration, like Kristen was talking about, so how farming and ecological restoration can come together. It's a very natural fit. So what she was talking about with the trees, a lot of people don't think about this, but there is what we call succession in any living system. So what we call weeds, a lot of the time, are the colonizers that come in when the soil is disturbed. So your garden's always full of them because you're always disturbing the soil. So those are the plants that are trying to fix what you damage when you damage the soil. If you stand back and wait for a couple hundred years, that'll eventually turn into an oak forest, right? So this bottomland is filled with those fast-growing weeds of the tree world, right? So they only live for 75 or 100 years. When compared with the oaks that might live for 400, they're just the babies that are coming in and fast-growing. So Kristen is very intelligently coming in and trying to push that succession level because this is a disturbed habitat that humans have messed up. There's a lot of ways to do that. You could run a skid steer in here and grind down these trees, right? You'd use diesel fuel, you'd tear up the soil while you did it. We're using the sheep because it gives the sheep a really excellent quality of life. So we make meat that's ethically raised, and the sheep are happy doing it, and it's fun. Like, you guys will get to interact with them today. They also fertilize, weed whack, and mow as they go. So when we came out here, this was so choked you couldn't walk in it. We wanted to plant trees. Well, what do? Well, we come out and weed whack it out, or we just send these guys in. They have fun clearing it every day, thin out some trees to let some light in, and now we'll be able to work in there. So that's basically the process, and we do this on various farms and acreages in order to improve the quality of the habitat, both for animals in the wild and animals on the farm. So that's what you're seeing here. If you have more questions about it as we go, I'd be happy to talk about it. When we're cutting trees and things, we can throw them to the sheep and let them eat. They love eating the leaves off the ground.
Well, my name is Jacob Canyon. This is our flock of hair sheep here in Sullivan Park in Parkville, Missouri. We're having them remove invasive species and do timber stand improvement. They're our best employees, the sheep over there. So, you know, lots of people will use goats for this kind of work, and that's great. It's definitely preferable to a machine that uses diesel and is going to create soil compaction and do all kinds of bad stuff to the environment. But we prefer sheep for a couple of reasons. The first, and frankly most important one, is that they're just easier to work with. So people who work with goats will tell you that you need a watertight fence to keep goats in. Sheep are nice because they don't climb. They stay on all fours. And that actually also gives us more control about how they graze and what we do with them. So not only is it easier to keep them contained in the fence, but it means they're not climbing trees, they're not eating everything down to the ground. They have a certain level where they like to feed. And so if we have saplings or less desirable, saplings of invasive species or less desirable species that we want to thin out, we can cut those down, lay them down, the sheep just eat them. So it just gives us that much more control.
You know, they're used to this and they know what's going to happen, so they line up like a dog waiting for the food bowl.
All right.
So just walk it this way and then pull that post, and they should just come right through. With the big flock, we say, "Hey, ladies!"
Ladies.
See how they fall back? Yeah.
Come
Hey, boys!
on
Come
in.
on, boys! Come on, sheep!
Come on, guys.
Come on, sheep! Just pull the fence back so they're nervous about it.
There
Come
you
this
go.
way, boys! Come on!
There
Once
we
one
go.
goes, the rest of them will figure it out.
Come get some tasty treats. Eat that Johnson grass.
Come on, boys! Go! Over here.
This way. Come here.
They're like, can you pull down this?
Border collie.
They're brought back to
Badger.
Badger. Come on, boys! Come on, sheep! Come on! Follow the boss man.
There we go.
Hooray! So the first thing they'll do is run and check the whole edges out. Oh, you can just do that. And see what they've got available and kind of find other favorites. And then once they've kind of figured out where the borders are, then they'll start grazing.
I love that they eat the Japanese hops. That's been a huge problem out here.
Yeah, they munch it.
I love that they don't really eat this goldenrod.
Yeah, it's cool. A lot of the wildflowers, they'll actually eat. You can see they've eaten all the leaves off the stem all the way up. See, they nibble it, but they leave the flower head on top, and so the flower head still blooms and goes to seed. They don't do that with everything. They will eat, like, for example, the asters, but like you can see here too on the snake root, they've eaten some of the leaves off of it. They've left the seed head, and they do that with ironweed. They do it with a bunch of natives that they'll just kind of nibble on, but they don't eat the top.
Would goats do that?
I don't know. Maybe not. And also, if you leave the sheep in long enough and they're hungry enough, they'll probably eat it too.
Okay.
But what they do is they'll eat their favorite things first. And so, what you want with a conservation grazing is you want to focus them on invasive species areas, and then also you want a light pass on stuff that's good. So this is exactly what I want to see. Like, they're nibbling on that goldenrod, stimulating it, doing good things for it, pooping next to it, but leaving the seed head. So yeah.
Perfect spot for those seeds to spread.
Yeah, exactly. And now there's open space.
Yeah.
So out here today, we're demonstrating not only that the sheep can graze down to clear the space for us to work in, help us remove invasive species, but also we're going in and doing the second stage, which is restoration, adding more species diversity to the understory. So some of these larger trees that are going to come in and take over succession, like these oaks, and then some of the understory trees like the hazelnut here, which is obviously food for people, but it's also food for wildlife. So the sheep have cleared the understory so we can get in and do the work. We've selected certain trees for removal, and then we've replaced it with a diversity of woody plants that are going to come in and fill out this woodland and make it a much more of a successful restoration project. So it's really, really exciting. Plus we got all these volunteers out here helping. It's so fun.
A key piece of this project was our ability to secure 54 3-gallon native trees from the Forest Relief of Missouri, an organization that has been planting trees and enriching communities across our state for over 30 years, distributing nearly 250,000 trees. These trees were selected from seedlings grown by the Department of Conservation, chosen specifically for their high ecological value in Missouri hardwood forests, just like we have here at Sullivan Nature Sanctuary. Donations and volunteer contributions from Spire made this delivery possible to Swope Park in Kansas City, Missouri, just 3 days before the workday that was scheduled with the support of our entire Parkville Parks Department and city and county leadership. The workday was made possible by the amazing volunteers of the We Care program from the Platte County Prosecutor's Office. Nearly 20 volunteers showed up to dig and install trees, sedges, and grass seedlings, and to apply mulch to the newly planted trees to help protect their roots and retain their moistures. In order to make sure the volunteers planted these donated trees correctly to ensure their long-term health, we had the joy of having a great hands-on tree planting education session from our community forester with the Missouri Department of Conservation, Taylor Neff.
Someone can be digging a hole, which we want wider than we want deep. We don't want to like take it out of the pot and stick it in another pot that's the same size. We want to give the roots some wiggle room so they'll want to go hang out with the fungi and all their other friends. So I recommend while someone's digging, you can pull this guy out and you can already see a lot of these are super loose, which is great, fine with me. Younger trees do better anyhow. Yeah, so this one we're not going to see a lot, but really what you want to do is kind of just pull back the soil and look for like the first root, essentially. And you want that just at or just above grade. It can always like settle down like lower, right? But we're not going to pull it back up. So it's best case if we're putting it above the soil line or just at the soil line. Yeah, and then a lot of times when the roots come out, they'll hit the side of the pot and then they'll start to circle around. So if that is the case, then you can try to like tease them out a little bit. We don't have hand pruners today, but the roots aren't that big. But it's important for stability. So like a joystick when you used to play like video games, you know, like if we're not going to attend to the roots and they're in a wad, then our trees aren't going to be as stable. So.
I'm Eric Zahn. I'm the Platte County Prosecuting Attorney. We're so happy to be out here as our office. This is our We Care team. Once a quarter, we go out somewhere in the Platte County community and volunteer our services. Today, we're at Sullivan Nature Sanctuary having a great time planting trees that we hope will be here for generations to come, improving this wonderful nature sanctuary that's just such an asset to our Platte County community. So we're happy to help out. It's great for us too. It's good for prosecutors to get to know their community. I believe we're better lawyers for the people of Platte County the more we know about Platte County. We've learned so much today. We're happy to be here.
This parcel that we are on is a conservation easement, which means it will be held in conservation for perpetuity. So I have been gotta want it somehow. I'm Kristen Bontrager. This is the Sullivan Nature Sanctuary. We sit right along Rush Creek, which is a flood abatement area for the Missouri River, to keep Parkville safe and happy in case there's ever a flood. The area that I'm working right now is a highly eroded, very silty, full of sun slope. So we are installing some high quality native prairie grasses such as prairie cordgrass and switchgrass. These grasses have really long roots and will grow into the soil and hold it in place and keep the soil from further eroding and making a really beautiful habitat over here, and it'll be gorgeous to look at. We also have some erosion control shrubs, and also they're beautiful. So we've got aromatic sumac and 9-bark over here. Those are going to do the same thing, but they're going to provide a little more structure while we wait for the native grasses to grow in and take root. This area, like I said, is real silty, so it means the soil just sloughs right off. When these guys get established, they are going to grow roots every which way, and they're going to kind of act as a glove and a hand and keep the soil in place, which is what our goal is. And that's going to keep more stormwater and more runoff from getting into the creek. It's going to keep any sort of soil and debris from running off into the creek. It's going to keep it in place and keep this area a lot more healthy and happy habitat. So you'll notice these log piles throughout Sullivan. The folks at Good Oak, Dan and Jacob, had the glorious idea to inoculate them with mushrooms. So wild mushrooms like lion's mane and oysters. They will decompose this, add mycorrhizae and all of the good nutrients into the soil that this area so desperately needs to add connectivity underground that we don't think of. So not only is this going to add food for the roots in the soil, but it is going to be food for humans. So for as long as we have these logs and these mushrooms around, we'll be able to harvest them. These trees that we were able to plant with our volunteers will be food for the wildlife, hopefully forever. Some of them can be food for us too, like these elderberries over here. And since we've been here last, we have gotten approved for our grant through the Department of Conservation. So we will tackle a few things once we receive that grant. We're going to get tree protectors installed on all of the bases of our trees and our shrubs to help keep any type of damage and even cold damage from the harsh winter we're hoping that we have. We don't want our volunteer efforts to go to waste from our amazing collaborative partnerships between a Good Oak, the Platte County Prosecutor's Office, obviously Deep Roots, and the Department of Conservation. So we're doing protective measures like watering every day, even though it's the fall, and getting tree protectors on all of these. Come spring, we'll go ahead and put water bags on all of them. So we will continue to water, but we will have our water bags just to make sure that everything is healthy and that we get 100% survival rate, I'm hoping. Another benefit of the partnership with Missouri Department of Conservation and our grant that we got for Healthy Woodlands for Parkville is that we will be able to utilize this grant to help us remove some of these trees like this. As you can see, this has a hollow inner. It looks like bugs have come and made this their home. So we're going to drop trees like this that have been deemed dangerous or necessary to remove. There's no immediate danger here, but as the years go on and if we get a really wet winter, this will not be a tree that anyone will want to see while they're walking on the trails. So that's a really great part of the grant that we have the opportunity to do. So not only is this mulch mountain a lot of fun for myself and my dog, but it was donated to us from another one of our partners, Urban Tree Specialists. They came in the day of, and as they are arborists and they remove trees, this is actually their waste product. So it's kind of a nice equilibrium of convenience for all of us. They get to leave their mulch piles here, and we get to use them to chew on for toys and mulch around our trees. And since we've got such big piles left over and we've got much more cleared space now, the entire Parks Department is going to work together to remulch the trails and actually add about half a mile to a mile more of trails over here. So while we still have a little bit more work to do out here, like removing some of these bigger brush piles, we have had, someone's already helping me here, we have had a lot of progress out over here, and just another reason that it's so important that we spend time on maintaining our partnerships and volunteer labor. 54 trees is a lot of trees to get put in the ground, and let alone the correct way. And that wouldn't have happened without the Department of Conservation and a good oak and deep roots. So I have so much gratitude for all of our partners and the amount of work that the Platte County prosecutors did. I made them do all the physical labor. And now we get to sit back and we get to relax, know that our grant has been processed. We've got helpers all over the place, human and dog kind. And we get to know that we're making our trails good and safe, not only for now, but also for the future, for people, for wildlife, for our domesticated critters. These are going to be an area that people are going to be drawn to and want to come visit, and we're very excited for that.
Well, what a pretty impressive project. Deep Roots is honored to be able to feature this really dedicated effort today. And it's my privilege now to invite our panelists and the key contributors to this project to join us here in the Q&A. Please populate the Q&A section with all of your questions. Raise your hand if you want some particular subject to be addressed, or throw it in the chat, whichever is most convenient for our audience today. But I'm honored to introduce the Midwest Climbing Arborist Champion of our community forester, Taylor Neff. If you want to show that trophy, we're lucky to have that resource here. Taylor is on speed dial for any of the communities in this region, organizations and landowners, to provide really expert advice and planning for forests of all shapes and sizes. Kristen Bontrager, the director of the Parkville Nature Sanctuaries, critical to this project's planning and implementation. And then, of course, our partners, Good Oak, Dan and Jacob, Regenerative Agriculture Superheroes, and Sheep Shepherd Masters, the keepers of the flock. So one key piece of this video that has come to some questions here is that, can you emphasize again, Dan and Kristen specifically, about the grazing practice or the grazing habits of these sheep, and what is important about the fact that they, as we identified, leave some of the seed heads, leave some of the flowers on, and what do they avoid? Like, what is left behind, and why is that so important?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun side effect of just a coincidence of how the plants defend their seed crop. A lot of times the heads will be more bitter, they won't be as attractive, and that's not true of every plant, but we've noticed when we graze our sheep on blooming wildflowers, they often take the lower leaves and leave the seed head on top, which is really handy. As I said in the video, though, if you leave them too long in any section and they don't have any other options, they'll munch those down. One thing that's important is that, that's a really cool side effect, but also the timing of your grazing can be really important too. So if you're going to a piece of property, once you address what your resource concern is, you can select a time of grazing that will optimize the lack of, destruction that they can do, because they are grazers at the end of the day. So for example, if you graze them earlier in the season, they'll crop those plants down, they'll have time to regrow, bloom, and seed. Whereas if you grazed them later in the season, they might graze things down that you don't want grazed. So there's a lot that goes into kind of planning it. But the key is to mimic nature. So how would nature have been, grazing those things? You'd have a group of bison, for example, that would come through and mow everything down and then move on somewhere else. And then there would be a huge amount of recovery period, months or even possibly years, before it will be grazed that way again. And that kind of stimulation helps give the prairie plants the advantage that they had, which is similar to the way fire works, right? And it helps to outcompete the invasive that didn't evolve in that context, right?
Excellent explanation, and complicated. It's almost like an animal husbandry version of the Chelsea chop, if you time it right. And now switching over to Taylor and Kristen to speak a little bit about the nuance of this program and specific question about younger trees. You mentioned in the planting demonstration on the workday that younger trees are preferred. Why is that? One would think maybe the bigger the better.
Yeah, so it certainly depends on your planting situation and your goals, what you're trying to accomplish. But in general, the younger trees are experiencing less transplant shock. So trees that are grown larger, and then they have to be dug out of the nursery and then put into the ground. So really, in the first years in that scenario, the tree is just focusing on regenerating their root system and not on growth, as opposed to a younger tree, a seedling, or even if we're planting just tree nuts, those trees can immediately be more quickly be established and then start to increase in their shoot growth instead of their root growth. But obviously, sometimes there's situations where you have to plant the larger trees. A lot of municipalities have restrictions where they have to plant at least like a 1-inch caliper tree. I met a woman recently that works as an arborist in Canada, and she was like, we have to plant 2-inch caliper minimum because of the snow plowing that we have up here. So there's obviously like exceptions, and sometimes you need like that immediate size. But they have done studies where the younger trees will grow and catch up to a larger tree when planted at the same time. So hopefully that answers your question.
It really does. And again, the accessibility to this nursery stock through Forest Relief, between Kristen and Taylor, I know you took a couple different approaches to bring this project to fruition. The trees themselves from Forest Relief, and then a cost share program as well. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so Kristen used both, she's using both seedlings and the containerized trees that come from a nonprofit called Forest Relief. And they actually get their planting stock from our nursery, from MDC's nursery, and then grow them out for a year. So they're their root systems are a little bit more established. They might have a little bit better survivability. But yeah, to your point, it's also like a cost consideration too. Kristen was able to get all of her trees, I think, for free for this project, which is pretty outstanding. Versus like if you're gonna plant like a 15-gallon containerized tree, and those might start out at $150, $180. And then also the labor. So when I pulled that tree out of the pot, it didn't require me to do essentially any root preparation. And I've planted a lot of other trees, and Jacob has too. We used to work together planting street trees, and the amount of time that it takes to pull a 15-gallon containerized tree out of the pot and assess all of the circling roots that tree is experiencing, it's time consuming and it can be cost prohibitive. But going back to where the trees are coming from, Kristen's getting trees directly from our state nursery, which those are between like 50 cents and $1, depending on how many you're getting and what species. And then also through Communi-Tree, which is a nonprofit that has a program twice a year. And in the fall, they delivered 650 trees here to Kansas City for free. So that's a great partnership that we have too. And then the Kansas side through Kansas Forest Service also has seedlings. And I'm talking a lot here, but yes, she's using MDC's cost share, which I can talk about again in a little bit, but the trees were free, so that wasn't part of that. But we are also able to fund projects like these with our community forestry cost share.
That's exciting. And links to both the George White Nursery, the Missouri side seedling sale, and the Kansas Forest Service seedling sale that is going to open up in January. Citizens, private landowners, or organizations can have access to that same nursery stock and species that are specifically chosen and bred, cultivated for their ecological benefits and their adaptability. It's, again, picking the right tree and putting it in the right place is critical to the effectiveness of these solutions, right?
I just wanted to add to what Taylor was saying about the seedlings is that since we run a stream team here in Parkville, These will be planted and contributing directly to the health of our stream. So we were able to secure these 85 little saplings for actually no cost.
That's my favorite price.
And that is replicable. So if you're involved with a stream team or you want to start a stream team, then you're able to get those nursery seedlings for free instead of even the 50 cents to $1.
Exciting. We're going to pivot a little bit here of some great questions coming in the Q&A. And our friend Chris DeLong, Roanoke Park Conservancy, has a really good question about what's next. The ground level after the bare dirt, or where the sheep have left a little bit of stuff. What's in the seed bank? Are you planting? Are you seeding? You've mentioned the seedlings. What is your seed approach? And is it going to be grazed, mowed, or burned in the future?
Okay, this is fun. I have a actual 10-year plan for this whole site. And springtime is the gentleman with a good oak, Dan and Jacob, will be bringing the flock back to do another grazing out at Sullivan. We are going to focus on the banks as well. So we will have done herbicide far in advance to the sheep coming back on the banks that you saw in the video with the Japanese hops. And then we will actually plant all of these 85 tree seedlings along the bank to try and take up that space so that the invasives don't have space to come back. And in the areas where we did all the trees and shrubs, you didn't see it, but it was 54 in a pretty small area. We've already spread some river oats, and river oats are a kind of aggressive shade grass, which we utilize in order to keep the honeysuckle from growing back, keep some of the viney stuff from growing back. We did plant, I think it was 106 different sedges, native sedge species out there. And then in the spring, I will be purchasing with this cost share program, 3 different species that'll do really well in the shade in that exact area. And they're going to be more of a ground cover. So if you're familiar with Pacra obovata, which is golden rag, I don't know the common name. There's like 8 common names for it. It's very cute. And some more sedges. And then I think the other thing I decided on was Pulminian reptans, the Jacob's ladder. So those are all going to do really well. They're going to spread. They're going to grow harmoniously with all the plants that are already there. And then once we build more of the trails to go through this whole area, it's kind of going to be more of an immersive, beautiful woodland is what we're looking towards. So we'll be seeding. I'd like to seed every other year. I know that's aggressive, but it's just the best way to get it to take off and spend as little time watering as possible and just keep going, monitoring trees, pruning trees, collecting seed when it's ready so that eventually we stop spending money on plants and seed and we can just have, that regenerative approach.
It's exciting. And so some of those plants specifically have been asked about, and that species list will be included in your follow-up resources. So Anne, you've got a few great examples there of shade loving, as well as water or moisture or inundation tolerant like river oats, and then some of those shrubs that are exceptional plants to prevent erosion. As this project went along, the real stars of this show, obviously 14 weather rams from Good Oaks staff, their livestock staff. A lot of people are curious about the management capacity of that. How do we find sheep grazing people? I think we've got a couple guys we can call. Are they effective in bush honeysuckle? And are they more effective? You touched on some of those things. And then, yeah, let's just go with that. Talk about the sheep a little bit more and how how quickly you move them, what size and expanse of acreage you can cover, the rotation timing, and then how folks can get some of this, some of the sheep engagement in their own properties.
Sure. So the speed of movement is going to differ based off of the landscape. So what we do is basically assess how much available forage is in a paddock and how many sheep we have, and then we make the paddock size match that. So at Sullivan, we had a paddocks that were about 1/3 of an acre, and the boys could graze that down in a single day to get it, open enough that we could walk in there and do some work. What we were doing was 2 days per paddock, and the first day we were letting them clear the understory. And then the second day, I would go in with a chainsaw in the morning and cut out the dangerous or invasive or just less desirable trees and let the sheep eat the leaves the second day, and then move them to a new paddock. So every 2 days they were moving. On the question about the bush honeysuckle, they love it, and it's actually extremely nutritious for them. I believe it's somewhere in the range of about 22% protein, which is the same as, say, alfalfa. Unlike goats, they won't stand up to pull it down, so we have to cut it for them. But with our particular method, a lot of times when you see goats used for this sort of grazing, they put the goats in there, they eat it, and then they leave, and then it kind of grows back. And over successive mowings, the goats will eventually sort of strip it down and kill it. Our method's a little bit more intensive with the sheep. What we do is we come in, we cut the invasives to the ground so that they can get them. With the bush honeysuckle, for example, we can stem treat with a little bit of herbicide to keep it from coming back again. And then we inoculate with a seed mix or trees or even tree seeds behind all of that. So we're trying to take a little bit more of a more active role in the restoration part. We aren't just grazing them. We're using them as tools in the restoration process. So, and we can do that on any type of property. We're talking actually with Taylor about doing it on some city-owned or possibly Port Authority-owned properties next year. We're going to come back to Sullivan, as Kristen mentioned. So, but this sort of work could be done on almost any type of property, whether it's maintaining a remnant by just grazing it instead of burning it, or taking over a completely, or something that's been taken over completely by invasives and clearing it. So,
and while we're talking about the sheep and the honeysuckle specifically, I think I saw in the chat someone asked about the seeds and if them eating it disperses the
right. And that's a really interesting thing about goats and sheep, is they actually grind the seeds when they eat them. So when they eat the fruits, they will grind them up, and the amount of seed that passes through the feces is very, very negligible. There's been all kinds of studies. This is why goats are used for clearing buckthorn, specifically up in Minnesota, because they eat the fruits and they grind the seed. The sheep do the exact same thing. So actually right now is a wonderful time to use them, because there's ripe fruit everywhere and there's not a lot of other forage. I just tried it this morning on our little group up here, or some of our ewes here, and they ate the berries right off the bushes and picked them up off the ground. So they'll definitely spread some seed, but compared to leaving it for birds to eat and spread it everywhere, it's a really good tool to use. So
fantastic. And this is applicable not obviously just in woodlands, but like you said, remnant prairies, grasslands. The process is the same, right?
Your approach is different based off of what it is, right? So if it's a remnant, you don't want them to be in there grinding it to the ground. You want to mimic what a bison would have done, so having a short, high impact, they stimulate the spreading of the plants and the regeneration of the roots. They drop a little fertilizer and then you get them out of there. You want to be careful. Now, you mentioned the seedlings. Like if you bring cattle in to graze a remnant, where they were before that really matters. So they could bring seed in that could actually damage it. Also, if animals are on a spot too long and they create too much disturbance, then you can reset some of your area to an earlier succession stage and cause, early succession weeds. A lot of people don't like to see ragweed and things like that on their remnant prairie. So you have to be careful about how you do it. But yeah, absolutely, they can be used for that. So
exciting. Now, still kind of tracking down this path of the honeysuckle problem, invasive species problem in general, and maybe Taylor and Kristen together can kind of speak to an agency-wide perspective or a community perspective. Denise brought up a question about speak to the importance of in this case, a citywide attempt to rid us of the Japanese honeysuckle, the bush honeysuckle, because eventually if it's one specimen, that specimen will create seed and disperse throughout the community, your neighbor's property versus your property, or then across the whole state or across the whole Midwest. how important is it to have a unified effort?
Well, I can speak to the city aspect, specifically our parks department. It's pretty remarkable because myself, I'm very passionate about this. I spent a lot of time in college studying invasives. And then, you know, I come into this job here, and what do you know, the park superintendent, before we had our amazing parks director, was all gung-ho on removing honeysuckle too. He's so excited about it. Their staff spends time helping me do it. I think the importance of it is getting the message out there, getting the awareness out there, because let's be honest, it's never going to be eradicated at this point, but we can get it out of our high priority areas. You know, if you have an entire neighborhood that's got all honeysuckle, well, let's organize, unite that neighborhood, teach you guys how to remove it, why you're removing it, what you can put in its place, and then you can start in these small little patches and eventually expand. So I think that's the really important thing of doing a citywide, is that, you know, you just kind of treat it as little parcels that will eventually spread out. It's a focus that I really enjoy, and I really appreciate that we're able to do out here and focus on that kind of stuff in our parks. People who are interested can come to workshops that we put on and learn the proper way to remove honeysuckle.
That's exciting. And yeah, critical awareness. It's again, we're a little far down this road to have this ambitious goal of 0 bush honeysuckle, but the continued effort. And then our friend Jacob Davis just chimes in and speaking to the job security of it. Steve Applebaum, the founder of Applied Ecological, wrote in his book, he says, if you want job security, get into invasive species removal, because you're never going to run out of work. A lifetime there.
I want to chime in on that, and I mean, I want to affirm what Kristen just said. Like, in the foreseeable future, we're not going to exterminate honeysuckle in this region. But that's not an argument for giving up. That's an argument for getting used to maintenance. This just has to become part of how we manage all of our landscapes. Is when we see species that are on this blacklist that we know will create monoculture thickets that will destroy all the biodiversity, we just have to know that those species have to go wherever we see them. It's eternal vigilance. I mean, it's maintenance. It's doing the dishes. You don't reach a point where you're done doing the dishes for the rest of your life. You just have to keep doing them. Yeah.
And you do it one dish at a time. So like, for everyone who's watching, that's like, how am I supposed to do that in my yard? I've got everything, you know, just one plant at a time. It can be discouraging, but if you start working and taking out a plant and you give yourself 5 minutes to look around and really appreciate the work you've done, it's going to seem a lot less daunting, and you should be more proud of your efforts that you have accomplished than you should be worried about what you haven't done.
Exceptional wisdom. We could apply that in so many different parts of our life. As a kid, my mom always would say to clean my room and to think of it like eating an elephant. And I thought that was silly, but she goes, it doesn't matter how big it is. You have one bite at a time. And ultimately, no matter how big the problem is, you gotta keep at it. You gotta keep taking those single bites. So extremely profound wisdom there. Let's see a couple further questions again about the follow-up process. So we've got a plan in place. We've got phase 1 of this restoration and the invasives removal. We've got some installed saplings. Aren't the seeds or the roots still going to be in place there? And ultimately, how many times a year do you foresee putting some serious effort into this site? Kristen, Dan, Taylor, whoever.
Continuously. We make a big effort to come out in the spring. So if things do come back, or if they were already there and we missed them, they're little, it's easier. If we are doing spot spraying, it's much less herbicide than what we would have used. Then you come back in the summer, as long as it's not above 80 degrees, to prevent herbicide drift if you are using herbicide. And the more native plants that you install, the more competition that you create for these invasives. And it's not just going to be an overnight process. It's not even going to be a 2-year long process. This is something that we have deep in our plans for the next, ideally 10 years, to get this completely established. And not just one type of invasive species. We just work through the multiple species that are present little by little. But again, tackling it in the spring when they start to emerge, getting rid of them ideally before their fruits are on. And then, so Dan and Jacob can probably speak a lot to bringing the flock out multiple times. And, that will also help because they'll keep eating those same things that they already like to eat.
That's
Yeah.
exciting.
So when you're hitting, like with the Japanese hops, for example, it's an annual, right? So right now it's all frozen off and there's just millions of seeds out there. First thing next spring, those little seedlings are going to start sprouting. And by the time there's a good covering of them on the ground, it's really hard to get an effective herbicide spray on a really thick stand of it. Same thing with, like winter creeper or something like that. But if you take the sheep out and let them pass over at one time, what they're effectively doing is creating thousands of tiny wounds on the plant that opens it up to the herbicide spray and allows you to get it in there. So with a stand of Japanese hops, they may actually just graze it down to the point where it doesn't resprout very easily, but they also might expose it to Kristen's treatments better. And then as far as how many times you come back, it really, again, it depends on your conservation concern or your resource concern for the site.
And how the site responds.
Right, exactly.
Right. I mean, we want to be really empirical and pay attention to how it's reacting and kind of be able to have the flexibility to make those decisions based on what the land wants.
Right.
That's brilliant. Well, time for one last question. And I wanted to kind of touch on some expectations of cost. And of course, Kristen has a municipal budget and Department of Conservation is cost sharing in some of these practices. Is something like this covered in a, what was that, community conservation cost share program? And is that accessible to private landowners? Obviously only in Missouri. Can you give us an idea of who's going to pay for this, I guess?
Right. So it is a cost share program. I guess about a year ago, the department changed several things that they're doing, which one major change included that they wanted to invest more in like urban conservation efforts. So what they did is they made a map and they said, okay, any conservation projects that are within this map of these higher priority areas, basically they realized that like 90% of the population lives in an urban area, right? So they're trying to better serve the people of Missouri by focusing more on the urban areas, which means an increased cost share reimbursement rate. So you asked if private landowners can use the cost share. Well, they can, and they have been able to for a really long time. And there's lots of practices that you can do and utilize our cost share. For Kristen's project, she's using a section of our cost share that's called the community forestry cost share. And there's also community conservation cost share. We'll just call it community conservation cost share. And in there, you can go up to $50,000 per entity per year in your application, which most of our applications aren't requiring that much. I think Kristen's ended up, even including the tree removals, her project for our purposes was under $7,000. But anyhow, groups can be reimbursed for their projects between 50 and 90% of that cost based on where they're located in the city. The department used several different parameters to decide who was going to be reimbursed at 50%, who's going to be reimbursed at 90%. And that's publicly accessible information in app, which I think we have a link to. But yeah, if you're like a neighborhood association, or we're even doing some projects with cemeteries. If you're a city, it can be any publicly accessible land that you can use this community conservation program for. And it used to be more of a grant where groups would have to apply, figure out their entire project, and then send it off to us and cross their fingers.
That was another big change that they made, is they recognized that it might be more effective if we had ongoing communication and we really worked with partners. So we operate as like the project planners. And Kristen did a lot more legwork in her proposal than a lot of our partners do, which I really appreciated. It took some work off of me. But we work with the partners and then we come up with this project plan together. It's a pretty simple form. I think this is like a couple of pages of our need and our objective and our budget, and then attaching like estimates. And then we have a team where we just vote yes or no on the meeting, in our meetings that we have once a month. So I kind of went on a big rant there, but any community group who wants to steward a publicly accessible space, and is within our community conservation tiers, which we have a map for, they can apply for this funding. It renews every July. So I know we're getting close to running out of funding for this season, which we'll know next Wednesday at our next meeting, how much we have left. But you can contact me and we can talk through their project ideas.
Thank you so much. MDC, obviously a huge resource for folks on the Missouri side, and just remarkable program. We're running a little over our time. We appreciate so much insight and wisdom. We're going to follow up with this. We have a lot more to hear from Department of Conservation and our partners on all sides of this project process here. So thank you to our panelists. I'm going to close out with some final news and a little bit of screen sharing of some upcoming events and some gratitude. Share a little gratitude here. Sydney and MDC staff are going to be leading a field trip. One of our most favorite things to do is to take our audience members and supporters to these places where conservation is being implemented in ways that are inspiring. Sydney is going to take us to Les Bluffs National Wildlife Refuge, coinciding with Eagle Days out there. And these images just a glimmer, don't even do justice to the National Geographic worthy populations of birds that will be seen there. Native wetlands, migratory birds, and just a really unique biome there in these Les Bluffs, this loose and sandy soil. So please, link to the Eventbrite will be featured in your resources. Sign up and join us. You can catch a ride from the Discovery Center, or you can opt to meet us out there for the auto tour and the conversation. Do join us if you are so inclined to share your wisdom and passion for native plants. Nature Advisors has kind of run through its first season of program rollout, and we have been able to serve over 40 homes and families throughout the Kansas City metro region with personalized on-site residential landscape and naturescaping advice. We have a dedicated team of volunteers in place that have done some great work. You can join us. And over the winter here, we'll be working on some training opportunities, and hopefully to be able to launch big time and to boost those numbers starting in March of 2024. So join us as Nature Advisors volunteers. Thanks to Evergy, Miller Hammond Charitable Fund, and of course, the Department of Conservation. The next webinar is actually going to be a sneak preview of that Les Bluffs trip. We'll be out with Jim Pearson of MDC and Sydney Ross, doing some filming and taking a virtual tour of the National Wildlife Refuge and the beautiful habitat there. So if you can't join us on December 2nd or you're on the fence, tune in on November 16th for Native Plants at noon, and we'll get you fired up about that trip. Lastly, of course, visit us at www.deeproots.org for information on all these events, archives of our webinars, resources galore, and opportunities for you to get involved. And while you're there, please consider making a donation. Your support is critical to the ongoing success of our mission, and we appreciate everything that you all do to continue to push our mission forward as a native plant landscape community. So thanks again for tuning in to Lunch and Learn. I'm Chris Cardwell. We'll sign off, and we'll see you soon.